That night, the sea breeze of Myrtle Beach drifted gently through the pine trees along the road, casting golden reflections across the dark, glassy water. Inside a green car, a young woman was laughing the bright, unguarded laughter of someone 20 years old, someone who still believed that her life was just beginning. Heather Elvis, a waitress at the Tilted Kilt restaurant, had just sent her father a photo. "I'm learning to drive a stick shift, Dad. Look at me, I'm getting good at it." It was 10 o'clock in the evening on December 17, 2013. 2 hours later, every trace of her would vanish. When the sun rose, Heather's green Dodge Intrepid was found parked by the Peachtree Boat Landing, a lonely riverside spot, far from the city, the kind of place where all you can hear is the water lapping against the shore and the wind whispering through the reeds. The doors were locked. Her belongings were still inside. Nothing seemed out of place. But Heather was gone. Her father, Terry Elvis, stood by the car, his hands trembling as he unlocked the door with a spare key. The driver's seat was empty. The silence inside felt wrong, as if someone had carefully erased his daughter's existence from the world. No screams, no witnesses, just a string of unanswered calls between Heather and a married man. That man would later tell investigators he only wanted Heather to leave him alone.
So I called her, told her, hey, look, I don't know if it's notes that you're, whatever. Enough's enough. Stop calling me. Stop texting me. She says, I don't know why it has to be like this or something like that. And I'm like, look, you just need to stop. It wasn't what you think it was. It was just...
But on that cold night in Myrtle Beach, it was he who called her first. And from that phone call, Heather Elvis was never seen again. In Myrtle Beach, behind the noise of tourists and neon lights, lies another world, quiet, familiar, and secretive. It's the kind of place where people greet each other by name, where diners never close, and where everyone knows everyone else's business. And in that small-town world lived Heather Elvis, a 20-year-old girl with bright brown eyes and dreams far bigger than the streets she walked every day. Heather graduated from St. James High School in 2011. She moved out soon after sharing an apartment with her best friend, Brianna Warland. By day she worked as a waitress at the Tilted Kilt, a Scottish-themed restaurant where smiles were part of the uniform. By night, she studied cosmetology, hoping to become a professional makeup artist. Her life was simple, but full of light, a mosaic of youth ambition and small victories. She was especially close to her father, Terry. Every day, she sent him at least one message, sometimes just, "I'm okay, Dad." To him, that little ritual meant the world. It was proof that his daughter was safe, happy, and still his little girl. Then came Sydney Moor. He was 38, nearly twice her age, a handyman who did maintenance work for local restaurants, including the Tilted Kilt. He wasn't charming or striking, just an ordinary man with a worn face and a quiet arrogance. But for Heather, he represented something different: stability, maturity, a kind of attention she'd never known. What she couldn't see was the storm that followed him, a storm named Tammy Moor, his wife. Possessive, jealous, and cruelly inventive in her anger, Tammy's control over Sydney went far beyond marriage. At first the affair seemed harmless. Sydney brought Heather coffee during her shifts, lingered for small talk, made her laugh. One message turned into two into a secret. Soon the affair grew into something Heather mistook for love, and Sydney mistook for escape. When Tammy found out, everything shattered. She didn't just confront them, she destroyed them. Tammy forced Sydney to call Heather while she listened, demanding he humiliate the girl and call her a mistake. Brianna, Heather's roommate, later said she heard her friend screaming through the phone that night, her voice trembling as she tried to hold it together. But Tammy wasn't done. She sent Heather intimate photos of herself with Sydney, called the restaurant, threatening to cancel contracts unless Heather was fired. Eventually, Heather lost her shifts and with them, her confidence. By November 2013, Heather decided to end it. She deleted Sydney's number, found a new job at a beauty salon, and tried to rebuild herself. But then rumors began to spread. Heather might be pregnant. She never confirmed it. But in messages to her friends, she wrote, "Everyone thinks I'm strong, but I'm scared. I'm scared of what's coming." Tammy, meanwhile, kept watching. Through fake social media accounts, through mutual contactees, through her husband. Sydney, trapped between guilt and fear, began to lose himself, a man pulled apart by two women, one he loved for her innocence, the other he feared for her rage. And Heather, the girl who once dreamed of creating beauty, didn't know that the man she'd tried to forget was about to call her again. For the last time. It was December 17th, 2013. A quiet Tuesday evening in Myrtle Beach. On White River Drive, Heather Elvis was getting ready for her first real date in months. The young man's name was Stephen Schiraldi, someone she'd met on Instagram. Kind, polite. A good listener. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't like Sydney. That night felt like a reset of a clean page. They went to dinner, shared small jokes, and afterward, Stephen took her to an empty parking lot near an abandoned mall to teach her how to drive a manual car. Heather laughed at herself every time she stalled the engine, snapping a photo for her father. "I'm doing it, Dad. I'm a pro now." It was the last photo she ever sent. Around midnight, Stephen dropped Heather off at her apartment. They talked briefly on the phone after she went inside a small suite end to a normal night. But what happened after midnight would destroy the illusion of normal forever. 1:19 a.m. Surveillance cameras at a Walmart on 10th Avenue caught Sydney Moor buying a pregnancy test. 1:35 a.m. A 5-minute phone call was made from a payphone near that same Walmart to Heather's number. The security footage showed Sydney stepping into the booth. Moments later, Heather called her best friend, Brianna. Her voice was shaky, emotional. She said Sydney had just called saying he'd left his wife and wanted to see her again. Brianna's reply was desperate. "Don't go, Heather. Don't you dare go. You know who he is." Heather whispered back, "I don't know. Maybe he's different now." 2:29 a.m. Heather tried calling the payphone back. No answer. 3:16 a.m. She called Sydney directly. The call lasted 4 minutes. No one knows what was said. After that, Heather's phone began moving toward the Peachtree Boat Landing, a remote riverside area lined with trees and silence. At almost the same moment, a black Ford F-150 was caught by a roadside camera, leaving the Moors' home, heading toward that same landing. 3:30 a.m. Heather tried calling again. No response. 3:42 a.m. Her final call. Then nothing. No messages. No signal. No sound. 5 minutes later, the same Ford truck was seen driving back the way it came. When dawn broke, a patrol officer spotted a green Dodge Intrepid parked near the riverbank. The car was locked, lights off. Everything seemed fine. He kept driving. 2 days later, the car was still there. Inside lay Heather's phone, purse, and keys untouched. But Heather was gone. The questions began to multiply. Why had Sydney used a payphone instead of his own? Why was his truck seen in the exact place her phone went silent? In criminal psychology, a killer always leaves a trace, not on the ground, but in the choices they make. Sydney believed a payphone would hide him. Instead, it became the proof that connected him to the last breath of a young woman who trusted him one last time. The morning of December 19th of 2013, sunlight fell weakly over the cold river at Peachtree Boat Landing. A local man called police to report a green car that had been sitting in the same spot for 2 days. When officers ran the plates, the result froze the air. The car belonged to Heather Elvis. Her father, Terry Elvis, rushed to the scene. He hoped desperately that his daughter was just nearby, maybe stranded, maybe waiting. But when he unlocked the car with a spare key, what he found felt wrong in every possible way. Her purse, her phone, her house keys, all neatly placed inside. No struggle, no blood, no footprints, just emptiness. It looked like she simply stepped out and vanished into the air. In his panic, Terry made his first mistake, one born of love. He drove Heather's car home himself, believing it would help the investigation. But by doing so, he erased the crime scene. If there had been any trace, it was now gone forever. Later that evening, while checking their shared phone plan, Terry noticed something strange. A number Heather had called 9 times the night she disappeared. He dialed it. A man answered, angry, aggressive. He cursed at Terry and hung up. That man was Sydney Moor. Police soon called Sydney in for questioning. He arrived tense, guarded, and cold. "That girl's not right," he said flatly. "I told her to leave me alone." He denied ever seeing Heather that night. But detectives had already pulled the Walmart footage, the payphone video, and the cell tower data. Every clue pointed in one direction. Sydney was the last person to speak to her. Confronted with evidence, he finally admitted making the call, claiming it was only to tell Heather to stop bothering him. His voice trembled. His eyes didn't match his words. It wasn't the tone of an innocent man. It was the sound of fear trying to disguise itself as control. Detectives obtained a search warrant for the Moors' home. For 11 hours they combed through every room. They didn't find a single item belonging to Heather, but they found something else. A new security camera system installed just 2 days after Heather vanished. When investigators reviewed the footage, what they saw turned the case on its head. Sydney and Tammy Moor were captured meticulously cleaning their black Ford F-150, scrubbing the front seats, wiping down the interior. Then Tammy was seen carrying the rags outside and burning them. The guilty believe they can wash away a crime. But cleaning is confession, a ritual born from panic. You don't burn what you're not afraid of. As investigators built their case, Tammy took the fight online. She created Facebook posts portraying herself as the victim, a betrayed wife, falsely accused. She described Heather as reckless, flirtatious, and the kind of girl who destroyed families. Her words spread fast. People started to believe her. Some even said she got what she deserved. The court of public opinion divided in two, one defending the Moors, the other demanding justice for Heather. Meanwhile, Terry and his wife Debbie organized search teams, handing out flyers, combing woods, marshes, and riversides, day after day. Sydney and Tammy, in contrast, smiled for free photos, went shopping, posted about moving on. But for investigators like Luis, those smiles said everything. The innocent don't scrub their truck at midnight. They don't burn rags. And they don't write essays online to convince the world they're blameless. The wind at Peachtree Landing still whispers across the river, but now it carries a different sound, the faint echo of a secret waiting to be pulled from the water. By February 2014, nearly 2 months after Heather vanished, police finally arrested Sydney and Tammy Moor. They were charged with kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and indecent exposure. The news spread across South Carolina like wildfire. Yet for Heather's family, it brought no peace because their daughter was still missing. When officers led the couple out of their home, Tammy held Sydney's hand, chin lifted high, a defiant smile on her lips. She didn't look frightened. She looked proud. Soon after, she posted on Facebook, "We are the victims of a witch hunt. They are trying to destroy our family." And some people believed her. Supporters began calling the Moors the innocent couple, painting Heather as a homewrecker, a girl who went too far. For the Elvis family, it was unbearable. They received threatening calls, anonymous letters, and online harassment. All the while they continued their search posters, community meetings, and sought prayers by the river. There's nothing more cruel than when the guilty are allowed to speak, while the dead remain silent. In 2016, Sydney's first trial for kidnapping began. The courtroom was filled with tension. Heather's parents sat in the front row motionless. Sydney took the stand, expressionless, eyes hollow. He insisted he hadn't seen Heather since October, that the payphone call was just to tell her to leave him alone. But the evidence told another story. CCTV footage, cell records, GPS data, and his own lies all wove together a damning timeline. Still, after hours of deliberation, the jury couldn't reach a verdict. 10 voted guilty, 2 refused. Later, it was revealed that one of the holdouts was a personal friend of Sydney's lawyer. The judge declared a mistrial. Justice doesn't always fail because of lack of proof. Sometimes it fails because of fear, or pity, or prejudice. In 2017, Sydney was tried again, this time for obstruction of justice for lying about him the payphone call. Under oath, he finally admitted that he had removed the SIM card from his own phone, using the payphone so he couldn't be traced. That single admission sealed his fate. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, the maximum penalty. A year later, in October 2018, it was Tammy's turn to face trial for conspiracy to kidnap. She entered the courtroom, confident, dressed neatly, almost sci-fi. But when the jury watched surveillance footage of her burning rags and ordering her husband around like a prisoner, her smile faded. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty. Tammy Moor was sentenced to 30 years in prison. In September 2019, Sydney faced his final trial for kidnapping Heather Elvis. And this time a surprise witness stepped forward. Donald D. Marino, Sydney's cousin. Donald testified that Sydney had once shown him a photo of Heather, her face covered in scratches and streaked with what looked like blood. Sydney told him, "She's gone." The courtroom fell silent. Heather's father wept. Her mother bowed her head, not in relief, but in recognition. They had known this truth all along. By the end of the trial, the verdict was clear: Sydney Moor guilty. He received 30 years in prison, the same as his wife. But neither of them ever confessed. Neither revealed what really happened that night, or where Heather's body lies. A sentence can end a trial, but not a crime. When the body is never found, the guilt doesn't die. It lingers in every sleepless night, in every unanswered question. Justice may have a number, but closure never does. When the courtroom doors finally closed, Myrtle Beach returned to its quiet illusion of normalcy. But for the Elvis family, time had stopped on that cold December night in 2013. There was no funeral, no grave, only an empty space where Heather should have been. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, Terry and Debbie Elvis drive to Peachtree Boat Landing, the same riverside where her car was found. They bring flowers, light candles, and stare into the black water, waiting for a sign, a bracelet, a piece of fabric, a truth. But the only thing that answers is the wind whispering through the reeds, as cold and silent as the night their daughter vanished. In prison, Sydney and Tammy Moor still claim their innocence. They file appeals, write letters about the injustice they've suffered. Not once, not a single time do they mention Heather's name. A case can end with a verdict, but justice can't end with silence. Because justice isn't a sentence, it's the truth. And when the truth is buried, grief becomes the only thing left alive. Heather's father once said through tears, "If I could bring my little girl home, even just her bones, I would. I just want to bring her home." That sentence became a prayer whispered across South Carolina, a reminder that a crime doesn't end when the killer is caught, but when the victim is found. Today, Heather Elvis stands as a symbol for the countless missing people who vanished, not just from the world, but from memory. Sydney and Tammy may be behind bars, but Heather's spirit is still trapped between the river, the lies, and the silence of those who know the truth. And maybe only when someone finally dares to speak it, will she be free. If you believe every victim deserves to be found, share her story. Because truth only lives when someone is brave enough to keep searching for it.
Glen Lee, East Kilbride, a quiet neighborhood where doors usually shut early when night falls. But in the early hours of November 18, 2024, police broke open the lock of a small flat, and what they found inside would change their lives forever. Beneath a single towel lay the decapitated body of Phoenix Spencer Horn, 21 years old, a young woman whose name matched her spirit, a flame that had once brought warmth to everyone around her. 2 days after killing her, Euan Methan, her boyfriend of 2 years, calmly called 999 and said, "I had a psychotic break and killed my wife." No panics, no tremor, just words spoken in a steady, cold tone, as if he were describing someone else's tragedy. Phoenix had been the kind of friend everyone wished for, kind, empathetic, always the first to help others climb out of their darkest moments. But the man she loved, the man she trusted most, would be the one to destroy her. For 2 entire days after her death, Euan lived inside that flat, eating, sleeping, scrolling through his phone, while her mutilated body lay only a few feet away. What could drive a man with no criminal record, no known addiction, no violent past to turn into a monster within the walls of what was supposed to be their home? This isn't just the story of a murder, it's a descent into the psychology of possession, control, and the fragile boundary between love and domination. When Phoenix Spencer Horn met Euan Methan at a family gathering, no one could have imagined that their meeting would end in tragedy. She was 21, young, hard-working, with a smile that lit up every room. He was 27, a Royal Mail postman, polite, soft-spoken, and seemingly dependable. Together, they looked like the picture of stability, a couple built on love and mutual respect. To the Spencer family, Euan was perfect. Phoenix's mother, Alison Spencer, adored him, often texting him about everyday things, as if he were her own son. Phoenix herself spoke of him with quiet pride, certain that she'd found someone safe to build a life with. But no one, not even Phoenix, noticed the small fractures forming beneath that image of harmony. By early 2024, Euan began to complain about Phoenix's work schedule. She worked long hours at the Stratavan Hotel, often taking night and weekend shifts. At first, his words sounded affectionate. "I just miss you when you're gone." But over time, that tenderness turned into guilt-tripping. "You care more about your job than you do about me." Phoenix, being deeply empathetic, felt guilty. She apologized. She promised to come home earlier. That's how control begins, not with violence, but with guilt. Euan didn't forbid her from working. Instead, he made her want to change for him. Each apology from Phoenix became another step into submission, her independence shrinking under the guise of love. Outwardly, they looked like any other young couple, but inside the small flat on Glen Lee, Phoenix was fighting an invisible war between affection and emotional confinement. Friends said she was still cheerful, still smiling, but sometimes her eyes betrayed a quiet exhaustion. She was the kind of woman who tried to fix others, even if it meant breaking herself. Euan's tone in messages gradually shifted. No longer, "I miss you now," it was, "Why aren't you home?" Or, "You're too busy for me." Phoenix never fought back. She soothed him instead. "I'm sorry. I'll be home soon." When love demands an apology for simply being yourself, it's no longer love. On the evening of November 16, 2024, Phoenix finished her shift and texted Euan, "I'm on my way home, let's have dinner." Her last message to her mother came at 9:37 p.m. "Euan and I are eating dinner together." No one knew that in just a few hours, That dinner would mark the end of her life and the beginning of one of Scotland's most horrifying modern crimes. At that moment, as she sat across the table from the man she loved, smiling through exhaustion, Phoenix could not have known that she was staring into the eyes of her killer, a man whose version of love had already turned into ownership. Saturday night, November 16th, 2024. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary inside the small flat on Glen Lee, East Kilbride. Phoenix came home after a long day at the Strativan Hotel, still smelling faintly of coffee and perfume, her energy soft but steady. She and Euan sat down for dinner, a quiet meal that, to her, symbolized peace after a tearing day. But in truth, it was the calm before the storm. Around 8 p.m., Euan ordered takeaway. The delivery driver later told police that Euan looked completely normal, not drunk, not high, not angry. For investigators, that detail would later become crucial. It meant he was fully aware of what he was about to do. At 9:37 p.m., Phoenix sent her final message to her mother. Euan and I are eating dinner together. It was her last contact with the world outside. After 10 p.m., the downstairs neighbors began hearing strange noises, heavy footsteps, then muffled thuds, then silence. At first, they thought the couple was arguing, but the sounds that followed were not an argument, they were a fight for life. In that narrow hallway, Phoenix Spencer Horn was fighting for her life. Euan attacked her with 3 different knives. The assault was brutal, relentless. According to the autopsy, Phoenix suffered 20 stab wounds, 10 of them to her face. 1 deep thrust into her chest that pierced her vital organs. He also strangled her, pressing his hands around her throat as she struggled to breathe. The crime scene later told a horrific story, blood trails from the bathroom to the hallway, then to the bedroom, proof that Phoenix tried to escape. 1 knife was found in the bedroom, 2 others beside her body. Euan's phone activity tracker showed a sudden spike in movement around midnight, matching the timeline of the neighbors' accounts.
Did you hear any noises or bangs?
I had a bad smell in my house the early hours of the morning she was found, basically just before I went to my bed. There was a bad smell in my kitchen, basically where the walls joined together. Horrific, absolutely, just it gives me shivers thinking about it, if I'm honest.
It was digital proof of a killing in progress. After the attack, Euan didn't flee. He stayed. He watched the stillness he'd created, then began the next stage of his crime, a calculated cover-up. He took the same knives and decapitated her body, attempting to dismember her further, cutting at her wrists and ankles in a grotesque attempt to erase what he had done. This wasn't madness. It was control, the final, absolute form of it. When the killing stopped, Euan cleaned the knives, pulled a towel over Phoenix's body, and sat down in silence. Then, like a man checking his messages after dinner, he unlocked his phone and began searching for cocaine dealers online. For the rest of that night, he scrolled, texted, and waited, living among the blood and the silence he had created. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Alison Spencer was smiling at her phone, thinking her daughter was safe at home after work. But inside that flat, Phoenix's bright light had been extinguished.
Somebody had said to me, if God came to you and said, I'm going to give you this beautiful daughter, but you'll only have her for 18 years, and then we need to take her back, would you still want her? And I would take those 18 years and go through the pain rather than have nothing. And although just now that probably offers no words of comfort for Phoenix's parents, maybe one day it can.
And Herr Killer calm, sober, and deliberate had just entered the most disturbing 48 hours of his life. What he did next would shock even the most hardened detectives, not because of how he killed, but how he lived afterward. After Phoenix's death, the flat on Glen Lee became a silent tomb. For the next 2 days, Euan Methan lived inside it, breathing the same air as the mutilated body of the woman he once claimed to love. Some killers don't run from what they've done, they stay. Not out of guilt, but out of control. Immediately after the murder, Euan cleaned up the blood, covered Phoenix's body with a towel, and walked away from her remains. There was no panic, no breakdown. Instead, there was a chilling calmness. Around 2:40 a.m. on November 17th, just hours after the killing, he texted drug dealers, trying to buy cocaine. He kept messaging them all night and into the following day. Forensic investigators later discovered that, during those hours, Euan accessed websites 170 times, mostly adult content. He spent more than 10 hours online, while Phoenix's decapitated body lay hidden under a towel only a few feet away. A forensic psychologist later said, "This is what we call moral dissociation, when a killer no longer sees the victim as a human being, only as an object." That Sunday morning, Phoenix's mother, Allison Spencer, sent a text, "Hi, Fee. Just checking if you're okay." A message came back not from Phoenix, but from her killer. "Fee's still sleeping. I'll have her text you later. X." That small letter X at the end, a little kiss. A habit Phoenix always used, was enough to convince Allison everything was fine. He knew exactly how to imitate her. He knew how to make her mother feel safe, and he used that knowledge as a weapon. Later that day, Euan drove around East Kilbride in Phoenix's red Vauxhall Corsa, still pretending she was alive, sending more fake messages, maintaining the illusion that everything was normal. This wasn't chaos, it was strategy. This is what we call maintenance control, when a killer continues to manipulate others to feel a sense of dominance, even after the victim's death. By Monday morning, November 18th, the lie began to crumble. Phoenix was supposed to work that day. She was known for her reliability. She never missed a shift, never failed to text if she was running late. When she didn't show up, her coworkers grew immediately concerned. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. Inside the flat, Euan sat on the couch, scrolling on his phone, still messaging drug dealers, pretending the world outside didn't exist. But reality was closing in. Finally, around midday, he picked up the phone and dialed 999. "I had a psychotic break," he said, voice unnervingly calm. "And I killed my wife." It wasn't a confession born of guilt, it was a man realizing he could no longer keep the lie alive. When police broke through the door that afternoon, they would uncover a crime so deliberate, so emotionally void, that even the most seasoned detectives would later call it one of the darkest cases they had ever seen. By noon on November 18th, 2024, when the emergency operator answered a new 999 call, no one expected to hear a man confess to one of Scotland's most horrifying modern murders. "I had a psychotic break, and I killed my wife." The voice on the line belonged to Euan Methan, calm, flat, eerily steady. No tears, no panics, just a rehearsed tone, as if he'd practiced the words. When a killer confesses but still tries to control the narrative, that isn't remorse, that's manipulation. During the call, Euan didn't simply admit to murder. He tried to frame himself as the victim. He claimed that he and Phoenix had been messing around, that he'd been taking steroids and cocaine, and that something must have been spiked. He insisted it was all a terrible accident, not an act of rage. But when police arrived at the flat on Glenlee, every lie collapsed. What they found inside shocked even the most hardened investigators. Phoenix Spencer Horne's decapitated body lay under a towel in the hallway. 2 blood-covered knives were beside her. A third had been tossed into the bedroom. Blood covered the walls, the floor, and even the door frames, the silent evidence of a prolonged, frenzied assault. When officers handcuffed Euan, he remained unnervingly calm. He didn't cry or resist. He only said one thing: "I couldn't stay with her like that. I tried to cut her up." Those aren't the words of a man who lost control. They're the words of someone who never intended to give it back. In interrogation, Euan continued his act, repeating that he'd blacked out, that drugs had made him violent, that he wasn't himself. But investigators were ready. Phone data proved he'd been texting Phoenix's mother, pretending to be her. Search history showed hundreds of explicit sites accessed after the murder. The food delivery driver testified he'd been sober that night. The movement tracker on his phone matched the exact time of the killing. Toxicology tests showed no drugs or alcohol in his system. Everything pointed to premeditation and full awareness. He hadn't blacked out, he had planned. acted, and covered up with chilling precision. When police informed Alison Spencer about her daughter's death, her world collapsed. Through sobs, she asked one question no one could answer. So, all those texts I got, they weren't from her. There's no cruelty greater than making a mother believe her child is still alive through the very phone that should have been evidence of her death. In court, Euan's defense tried to argue diminished responsibility, but the prosecution's words cut through every excuse. He wasn't insane. He was in control until the very end. When the verdict came, the courtroom fell silent. Euan Methan was found guilty of murder and of attempting to destroy evidence, sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years. The law can sentence a man, but it can't measure the depth of what he took from the world that night. On July 14, 2025, inside the High Court of Scotland, Lord Matthews looked directly at the man in the defendant's box, the same man who once played the role of a loving boyfriend, now hollow-eyed in a gray prison uniform. His words fell like stone. Life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 23 years. There was no reaction. Euan Methan didn't cry, didn't plead. He simply lowered his head, never once turning toward the Spencer family, the family that had once called him son. He had written a letter of remorse, claiming, "I know how loved Phoenix was, how much she completed her family. I can't believe I've taken her away from them." But the judge replied coldly, "That letter answers none of the questions that will haunt her family for the rest of their lives." Justice was served, but justice doesn't bring peace. Not when love is replaced by absence. Alison Spencer, the mother who once texted her daughter every morning, now stood before the court with trembling hands. Through tears, she said, "If God told me I could only have my daughter for 18 years, I'd still say yes, because those 18 years were worth every bit of pain that came after." In the months after the trial, the Spencer family refused to let Phoenix's story end in silence. They donated every dollar from her memorial fund to Women's Aid Glasgow, an organization that helps women escape abusive relationships. The charity issued a statement that read, "Her name Phoenix no longer stands for loss. It stands for strength, for change, for rising again from the ashes." Euan Methan may one day walk free, perhaps at 50 years old, but for the Spencer family, the sentence will last forever. Because sometimes justice has an end, but grief doesn't. The final image fades to Phoenix's photo, her smile radiant, full of the light she gave to others. If you ever see someone being controlled, silenced, or made to feel small in the name of love, don't look away. Silence is the quiet partner of every tragedy. Phoenix Spencer Horn, 21 years old, a light extinguished too soon, yet one that still shines in the lives she saved. Shropshire, England, a quiet land of rolling fields and soft amber light, where the evenings seemed to last forever. There lived a 17-year-old girl named Georgia Williams, bright, kind, and full of promise. On the night of May 26, 2013, Georgia left her family's home in Telford. She was only going to a friend's house, Jamie Reynolds, for a quick photo session. She told her parents she'd be back in half an hour. 3 hours later, her mother received a message, "I'm hanging out with friends. Don't worry." A simple text, familiar emojis. But Georgia never came back. 2 days later, detectives unlocked a camera. Reynolds had tried to wipe clean. What they found were photos that told the story no one should ever see, each image capturing the final moments of a young life. One breath at a time, in absolute silence. It became the case that shook the entire nation, the kind of brutality seasoned detectives had never witnessed before. From an innocent photo shoot, the small, peaceful town of Telford descended into a nightmare without a dawn. Georgia Williams was born on September 17, 1995, in Telford, a quiet town in Shropshire, England, a place of red brick houses and narrow streets lined with maple trees. She was the youngest daughter of Steve and Lynette Williams. and the little sister of Scarlett. Her family was close, filled with warmth and quiet pride. Georgia grew up as a symbol of hope, smart, responsible, compassionate. She had been bullied in middle school, but rather than grow bitter, she learned to protect others who couldn't protect themselves. At high school, she became the head girl, a respected leader and role model. She joined the Air Cadets, dreaming of one day serving as a paramedic in the Royal Air Force. She had that kind of smile that made people believe the world could still be kind. At 17, Georgia worked part-time at a local petrol station. That's where she met Jamie Reynolds, a 22-year-old man who kept mostly to himself, quiet, awkward, a little out of place. Most people ignored him, but not Georgia. She reached out, talked to him, invited him into conversations, made him feel seen. It was the kind of kindness that came naturally to her. But, to Jamie Reynolds, that kindness was not light. It was fuel. To him, Georgia wasn't just a friend. She was proof that he mattered. What began as gratitude slowly turned into obsession, and obsession soon became fantasy. When he confessed his feelings, Georgia gently turned him down. She said she valued him as a friend, nothing more. He smiled and said, "That's okay." But inside, something in him broke. That's the moment when men like him cross an invisible line from wanting to be loved to needing control. Jamie Reynolds had been isolated for most of his life, disconnected, starved of validation. At 14, he had been caught watching extreme violent pornography, the kind most adults can't stomach. His parents tried to block the sites, but he found a way, registering his own private Wi-Fi account and continuing in secret. When they contacted child services, they were told it wasn't illegal. That silence, that single bureaucratic shrug, planted the seed. As the years passed, Reynolds stopped distinguishing between fantasy and reality. He started writing stories about torture and murder, printing photos of girls and sketching nooses around their necks. He wrote 40 such stories, each more twisted than the last. One of them, finished in May 2013, was titled Georgia Williams in Surprise. 3 weeks later, he made it real. Not every monster is born in the dark. Some are raised in plain sight, nurtured by neglect, and guided by the kindness of those who believed they could be saved. May 26, 2013. A quiet Sunday evening in Telford. The Williams family was hosting a small barbecue in their garden. Laughter, the smell of grilled food, the kind of night that feels safe. Among them, 17-year-old Georgia Williams was getting ready in her room jeans, a leather jacket, a soft touch of makeup. She told her parents she'd be gone for just half an hour. Her friend, Jamie Reynolds, I wanted to practice photography. He'd asked her to be his model, just a few portraits. Georgia hesitated. Her grandparents were visiting, but she didn't want to disappoint anyone. That was who she was, a promise kept, no matter how small. Her father, Steve Williams, leaned on the doorway, smiling. "You look like Sandy from Grease." She laughed, kissed his cheek, and walked out the door. 7:30 p.m. The moment time stopped moving forward, the distance between their homes was less than 5 minutes. A short drive, for a one-way journey. Inside the Reynolds house, where his parents were away on vacation, Jamie had prepared everything. A camera, a rope, and a red recycling bin placed at the center of the room. He called it a setup. Georgia thought it was art. She had no idea she was stepping into a scene written weeks earlier in one of his stories. The first few recovered photos showed her smiling, slightly nervous, unaware. Her trust, her kindness, the two things that defined her, became the very tools he used to destroy her. Some people don't want your love. They want your surrender the moment they see fear in your eyes, because that's the only way they feel alive. When Georgia sensed something was wrong, it was already too late. Reynolds began giving strange directions, changing his tone. The rope hung above her head, the light dimmed, and then silence. What followed is known only through the evidence he left behind. He strangled Georgia to death, photographed and filmed the act, then violated her body over and over again. In different rooms of his parents' home, he removed her jewelry, keeping them as trophies, tokens of ownership. Then, as if nothing had happened. He sat down, ate, and looked through the photos. The next morning, he loaded Georgia's body into his silver van. He drove away, stopped at a movie theater, and went inside to watch a film. Investigators later said it was his twisted version of a date. That night, Georgia's mother sent her a message. "When are you coming home?" A few minutes later came the reply. "I'm with friends. Don't worry." It looked like Georgia's voice, but it wasn't. By then, Georgia had been dead for almost 12 hours, and the person texting her mother was the man who killed her. The morning of May 27th, 2013 began with a strange stillness over Shropshire. Inside the Williams home, unease hung in the air. Georgia's bed was untouched. Her phone was silent. Her favorite jacket still draped over the chair. Her mother, Lunette, sent a message at 6:30 a.m. "Are you okay? Sweetheart, when are you coming home?" An hour later came a reply. "I stayed at a friend's house. My battery's about to die." It was the last message ever sent from Georgia's phone. Her mother read it and felt something she couldn't explain. The words were right, but the rhythm wasn't hers. That afternoon, when Georgia didn't return, the family contacted police. The investigation began immediately. Every clue pointed to one person, Jamie Reynolds, the man she had gone to see for a photo shoot. Officers went to Reynolds' house. They knocked. No answer. They called out. Silence. Finally, they broke the door open. The house was spotless, unnaturally so. No sign of Georgia. No sign of Jamie. Only a faint smell of bleach, and a camera with its memory wiped clean. A clean house can be a confession. It's what remains when someone tries to erase the truth. Reynolds' parents were contacted. They were away on holiday. But they gave police one critical lead: their son's van, a silver Ford Transit. With that, police issued an alert across the country. Cameras on motorways, petrol stations, and borders were all watching for one vehicle. 3 days later, on May 30th, officers found Reynolds at a small hotel in Glasgow, nearly 280 miles from home. He was alone, calm, and cooperative. Too calm. When asked about Georgia, he said, "I don't know where she is. No emotion, no fear." He was taken into custody and brought back to Shropshire. Meanwhile, forensic teams re-examined his home. That same camera, the one thought to be empty, was handed to digital forensics. Technicians began the slow, meticulous process of data recovery. When the first images appeared on screen, silence filled the room. They showed Georgia alive, nervous, unaware, posing at the start of the shoot. Then came the sequence that no one in that lab will ever forget. Her final moments, the rope, the red bin, the end. Those photographs confirmed what everyone feared. Georgia was dead. But what they found next was worse than anyone imagined. Hidden on his hard drives were 16,800 images and 72 videos, many depicting violence, torture, and real acts of death. He hadn't just consumed that darkness. He had created it. In a notebook, they found 40 stories he had written, fantasies of killing and assaulting women. One of them bore the title Georgia Williams in surprise. It wasn't fiction. It was his blueprint, tracking the van's GPS. Police retraced his path, from his house, to a movie theater 60 miles away, where he watched a film while Georgia's body lay in the back of the van. Then onward, to Nant-y-Garth Pass, near Wrexham, a desolate stretch of woodland. That's where they found her, naked, strangled, alone among the trees. Even the most seasoned officers turned away. One detective later said quietly, "It wasn't just death we found there. It was the echo of everyone who failed to stop him." For the first time, the police weren't hunting a man. They were staring at a reflection of a system that had seen the warning signs and looked away. December 2013. The courtroom in Shrewsbury was heavy with silence. Sitting in the dock was a thin, pale young man, Jamie Reynolds, 23 years old, his face expressionless, his eyes cold and distant. He had spoken very little during the investigation. But on the first day of trial, without warning, he stood up, faced the judge, and said quietly, "I plead guilty." No explanations. No emotion, just those words. His defense attorney, visibly shaken, told the court, "Your Honor, my client suffers from severe personality disorders and has lost all capacity for control." But Justice Wilkie, the presiding judge, refused to let that be an excuse. His voice was sharp, deliberate, and cutting. Jamie Reynolds is a sexually deviant individual with a clear intention to kill. Georgia Williams died in unimaginable fear, the result of a murder meticulously planned and executed. This man poses a permanent threat to the public. Then came the sentence, the highest under British law, a whole life term. Life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Jamie Reynolds became the youngest person in British history ever to receive such a sentence. In the gallery, Steve and Lynette Williams, Georgia's parents, sat hand in hand. As the prosecution presented the final photographs of their daughter, both broke down. They left the courtroom, unable to breathe in a space that had just replayed her final moments. Outside, Steve told reporters, "No sentence will ever be enough, because he still has life, something he stole from our daughter. A full life sentence may lock away the body, but it never touches the hole left behind." Justice, in this case, came too late and not deep enough. 2 years later, in 2015, a serious case review was published. It exposed devastating failures by police, social services, and mental health authorities. In 2008, Reynolds had tried to strangle another 17-year-old girl in his own home. He was questioned and merely given a final warning. No charges, no supervision, no psychological evaluation. In 2011, he deliberately reversed his car into a girl who had rejected him. Once again, the case was quietly closed. Georgia's death was not born of impulse. It was written, permitted, and signed by every person who saw the danger and looked the other way. The official report called him a murderer in the making, a label that came too late to save the girl who had once believed in him. When asked if justice had been served, Georgia's mother whispered, "Justice did its job, but our hearts will never rest." The law punished a man, but what it could not punish was the silence that created him. When the courtroom doors finally closed, justice, at least on paper, had been done. But for the Williams family, the real sentence had only just begun. Back in their small home in Telford, time seemed to stand still. Georgia's room remained exactly as she had left it. Her perfume still lingered in the air. Her jacket hung neatly over the chair. Every morning, her mother, Lynette, made an extra cup of tea and watched it go cold. A year later, she wrote a book titled Our Georgia. It was not just a memoir. It was a confession, a warning, and a mother's unanswered cry for accountability. In it, she wrote, "He's serving a life sentence, but I still lie awake every night because I know he still gets to breathe." In most cases, evil hides behind rage or jealousy. But this time, it was born from emptiness, quiet, patient, and nurtured by indifference. Georgia did not die because she was weak. She died because she believed kindness could save someone. And sometimes, that belief becomes the blade turned inward. The screen fades to black. A single line appears. Georgia Williams, 1995 to 2013. An angel destroyed by the darkness of her own compassion. Justice can bind a killer's hands, but it can never bind memory. If you believe the truth must keep speaking so that darkness never grows in silence, subscribe. Stay with us, because some stories must be told, again and again. On June 2nd, 2007, the sky over Kansas was clear, the kind of soft summer dusk that makes the world look peaceful. 18-year-old Kelsey Smith had just graduated from high school 8 days earlier. Her life was opening up before her. College at the University of Kansas, a part-time job at the AMC Theater, and a sweet young love with her boyfriend, John. That evening, she told her father she was going to Target to buy a small gift for John's birthday. "Love you, Dad," she said, words that would become the last he'd ever hear from her. An hour later, her Buick was found parked in a dimly lit lot, several rows away from the store. The doors were locked, the keys tucked neatly under the driver's seat just the way Kelsey had been taught. Inside the car sat a wrapped gift, red ribbons still in place. But Kelsey was gone. Security footage from Target showed her walking calmly through the store, smiling faintly as she paid for her items. Nothing seemed out of place until she stepped outside. Behind her, a man in a white t-shirt followed at a distance. 15 seconds later, the car door slammed shut. The Buick pulled out of the lot, heading in the opposite direction of home. That was the last time anyone saw Kelsey Smith alive and the beginning of one of the most haunting investigations the state of Kansas had ever seen. The morning of June 2nd, 2007, began like any other in the quiet suburb of Overland Park, Kansas. 18-year-old Kelsey Ann Smith woke up full of energy. Just a week earlier, she had walked across the graduation stage, diploma in hand, eyes bright with dreams of becoming a veterinarian at the University of Kansas. Her life was still soft, unshaped, full of promise. She worked a short morning shift at the AMC movie theater, smiling as she greeted coworkers, completely unaware that this would be her last ordinary day. Meanwhile, her mother, Missy, was getting ready to attend a friend's wedding. Missy kissed her daughter goodbye, never imagining it would be the final time. After her shift, Kelsey met her father, Greg, and her younger sister, Lindsay. Together, they spent the afternoon at an amusement park. Laughter, sunshine, and family warmth filling the day. Around 6 o'clock, Kelsey said she wanted to stop by Target to buy a small birthday gift for her boyfriend, John. She asked Lindsay to come, but her sister was tired and stayed home. Before leaving, Kelsey told her father, "I'll be back soon." And then she added, softly, "Love you, Dad." At 7 o'clock, John arrived at the Smith home as usual. Kelsey wasn't there. He texted, he called, no answer. At first, Greg, a seasoned police officer, tried to stay calm. But as the minutes passed, a father's instinct began to scream louder than training ever could. He called Kelsey's friends. No one had seen her. She wasn't the kind of girl who disappeared or ignored her phone. Something was wrong, deeply, terribly wrong. John and Lindsay got into the car, driving through the familiar streets around Target, hoping for a glimpse of her Buick. And then, under the dim orange light of a distant parking lot, Lindsay spotted it. "There, that's Kelsey's car," she shouted. The gray Buick sat quietly in an isolated corner, far from the Target store. The area was poorly lit, almost abandoned. John approached with dread. Inside the car, he saw a Target shopping bag, red wrapping paper, and the small gift Kelsey had bought for him still untouched. The doors were locked, and the keys were hidden neatly beneath the driver's seat, exactly as her father had taught her. But Kelsey was gone. No blood, no struggle, just silence and an emptiness that felt heavier than violence itself. When Greg received the call, his voice turned from calm to command in an instant. "Don't touch anything. That car is a crime scene." Police arrived shortly after and taped off the area. The searchlights flickered across the vehicle's silver surface. Then one detective noticed something odd, a small piece of white fabric, like the edge of a t-shirt, caught in the trunk latch. Greg approached, heart pounding. He lifted the trunk, bracing for the worst. But it was empty. No body, no Kelsey, just the faint smell of fear in the night air. Forensic investigators combed through every inch of the car. The only clue they uncovered was a single foreign fingerprint on the seatbelt, not Kelsey's. Not anyone in the family. That print became the first thread of a much darker tapestry. As the night deepened, Greg stood by the car, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting in his eyes. The officer in him was methodical. The father in him was breaking apart. He whispered, almost to himself, "I'll find you, Kelsey. Whoever took you, I'll find him." That night, Greg Smith didn't sleep. The house was quiet, but his mind was loud, running through every possible scenario. On the kitchen table lay a city map of Overland Park, marked with red pins. shopping centers, roads, gas stations. He was no longer just a father. He was a detective racing against time. Greg, Missy, and John organized their own search party. Dozens of people, neighbors, classmates, even strangers who'd heard the news on the radio came to help. Flyers with Kelsey's photo were taped to every lamppost and gas pump across town. Missing Kelsey Ann Smith, 18 years old, last seen at Target in Overland Park. Meanwhile, detectives reviewed surveillance footage from Target. On screen, Kelsey appeared at 6:54 p.m. She walked in calmly, carrying her purse. Her hair tied back neatly. Nothing about her suggested fear. She shopped, chose a gift, smiled at the cashier. Everything looked perfectly normal. Then came the parking lot footage. Kelsey walked toward her Buick, opened the back door to place her bag inside. And then a blur, a flicker of motion behind her. Something or someone rushed into the frame. 15 seconds later, the car door slammed shut. The Buick drove away, not toward her home, but in the opposite direction. The room fell silent as detectives replayed the tape over and over. It was unmistakable. Kelsey hadn't left by choice. Greg, standing behind the technicians, clenched his jaw. "She didn't drive that car," he said, voice low and steady. The investigation deepened. Detectives combed through every second of footage inside the store, frame by frame, and there he was, a man in a white t-shirt and dark shorts, trailing Kelsey through the aisles. He stayed a few steps behind her at all times, pretending to browse. When she walked to the checkout, he turned and exited, first waiting. He never spoke to her, never looked directly at the camera, but his intent was carved into every movement. From that moment, the search transformed into a manhunt. Detectives checked nearby store cameras, especially the parking lot where Kelsey's car had been found. But the footage was dark, grainy. It only showed the car pulling in, headlights switching off, and a shadowy figure stepping out. The image was too poor to identify anyone. Greg's instincts screamed that it wasn't Kelsey behind that wheel. Their last hope was technology. Investigators contacted Kelsey's cell phone provider to trace her phone signal, but bureaucracy stood in the way. Privacy laws required a court order before releasing the data. The process would take days, for long days. For the Smith family, those 4 days were an eternity. They didn't eat, didn't sleep, only searched. Greg spoke to news outlets, pleading, "If anyone has seen my daughter, please, come forward." Finally, when the phone data was released, it led to a wooded area near Longview Lake, Missouri, about 15 miles from Target. The FBI joined the operation, bringing search teams, dogs, and helicopters. More than 200 people combed through the dense forest, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was thick and heavy, and then a voice shouted in the distance. They had found her. Under a layer of fallen leaves and branches lay Kelsey's body, naked, hidden, discarded. It was as if the forest itself had been forced to conceal someone else's sin. The search was over. But for Greg and Missy, the nightmare had only begun. When the confirmation came in, the room fell completely silent. After 4 endless days of searching, and the news no one wanted to hear finally arrived, they had found Kelsey. Her body was discovered in a wooded area near Longview Lake, Missouri, about 15 miles from the Target store. She lay there, naked, partially covered with leaves and branches, as if her killer believed that nature could conceal what he had done. The autopsy revealed a brutal truth. Kelsey had been strangled with her own belt. It wasn't a crime of sudden rage, it was methodical, deliberate, and horrifyingly personal. Greg and Missy Smith were called to the police station. The detective's voice was steady, professional, but every word was a knife. Greg sat motionless, his jaw clenched, hands trembling slightly on his knees. He had been a police officer for years, had seen death before, but nothing could prepare him for this. Missy's sobs filled the quiet room. Greg reached for her hand and whispered, "No one deserves to die like that, especially our girl." The case now shifted from a missing person investigation to a murder hunt. Detectives went back through every second of surveillance footage from the Target parking lot. Hours passed before they found something that made everyone in the room freeze. At 9:17 p.m., a man ran quickly toward a dark blue pickup truck, jumped in, and sped off. 5 minutes later, at almost the exact same time, Kelsey's Buick was found abandoned in a nearby parking lot. The detectives rewound the video to earlier that evening. The same pickup truck had arrived at 6:55 p.m., 1 minute before Kelsey drove into the lot. By sheer coincidence or fate, they parked side by side. That might have been the moment the killer first saw her. The moment he decided she would be his victim. The police released still images of the man and the truck to the public, asking for help identifying him. Within hours, 2 separate calls came in. One caller said he was the man's co-worker, the other his friend. Both gave the same name. Edwin Roy Hall, 26 years old, married, a father, the owner of a blue pickup truck. A quick background check revealed that at 15, Hall had threatened his adoptive sister with a knife, an early sign of the darkness inside him. That night, officers arrived at Hall's home. Through the window, they saw him loading bags into his truck preparing to flee. But he didn't make it far. Police surrounded the house and took him into custody on the spot. His wife stood on the porch, frozen, clutching their small child as Hall was handcuffed and led away. At the station, Hall was calm, disturbingly calm. "I don't know that girl," he said flatly. "You've got the wrong person." But detectives had already seen the CCTV footage. The man in the white t-shirt and dark shorts, the same build, the same walk, the same truck. When confronted with the evidence, Hall changed his story again. "I followed her because she had nice legs," he muttered, smirking a grotesque mix of arrogance and delusion. Then came the proof that ended every lie. The fingerprint found on Kelsey's seatbelt was an exact match to Hall's. The smirk disappeared. The room went dead silent. Behind the one-way glass, Greg Smith exhaled for the first time in days. He didn't feel triumph, only exhaustion and a hollow kind of justice. He looked at the man who had taken everything from him and whispered, "We've got you." Inside the interrogation room, the air was heavy still, except for the flickering light above the table. Edwin Roy Hall, 26 years old, sat with his hands clasped, eyes blank. Across from him, the detectives laid down a photo of Kelsey Smith, the girl whose life he had stolen. At first, Hall denied everything. "I don't know her," he muttered. His voice was calm, too calm, as if he'd rehearsed the line. But the detectives had seen that kind of calm before, the kind that hides something dark underneath. They turned on the projector. The screen filled with grainy black and white footage, Kelsey walking through Target, and behind her, Hall in a white t-shirt, dark shorts following, pretending to browse, keeping the same distance all along. Hall smirked. "I just looked at her," he said. "She had nice legs." The room went silent. Behind the one-way glass, Greg Smith, Kelsey's father, stood motionless. He'd faced killers before, but never one who had taken his child. The detectives didn't stop there. They slid another document across the table, the forensic report. The fingerprint found on Kelsey's seatbelt matched Hall's perfectly easily. That was the moment Hall's mask cracked. He exhaled slowly, then whispered, "All right, I'll tell you what happened." He said he saw Kelsey in the parking lot that evening. She looked perfect. He said, "I don't know why. I just wanted her." He followed her inside, waited for her to finish shopping, then ambushed her as she got into her car. He pulled a gun, forced her into the passenger seat, and drove away. He took her to a wooded area outside Kansas City, near Longview Lake. There, he assaulted her, and when she begged him to let her go, he panicked. He used her own belt to strangle her until she stopped moving. Then he dragged her body into the woods and covered it with leaves and branches. Afterward, Hall drove her car to another parking lot, left it there to mislead police, then calmly walked back to his blue pickup truck and drove home to his wife and son as if nothing had happened. His confession froze the room. The words hung in the air like poison. Greg's hands clenched until his knuckles turned white. In September 2008, The trial began in Johnson County. Hall appeared in court wearing an orange jumpsuit, eyes downcast. When the judge asked if he wanted to say anything, Hall stood up. "I'm sorry."
"I'm so sorry for what I've done." That's it. That's all I can say.
He said quietly, "I'm truly sorry to the Smith family. I didn't mean to. It just happened." But no one believed him, not the jury, not the public, and certainly not Greg and Missy Smith. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Reporters later asked Greg how he felt. He paused for a long moment before answering. "Justice was done," he said, "but fairness, that doesn't exist. Not when your child is gone." The courtroom emptied. The cameras turned off. But for the Smith family, the story didn't end there. The fight was no longer about punishment, it was about purpose. After the trial, the news faded, cameras left, the world moved on. But inside the Smith home, time stopped. Kelsey's room stayed exactly as she'd left it, the clarinet by her bed, her graduation cap on the dresser, the photo of her smiling at 18 frozen in place. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the silence of two people learning how to live with the unthinkable. Greg and Missy Smith knew that grief couldn't be undone, but it could be transformed. They decided their daughter's death would not be the end of her story. Greg, a police officer, kept replaying the timeline in his head. They could have found Kelsey sooner if only the cell phone company had released her location data right away. But the law required a subpoena, a process that took 4 days, 4 days that separated hope from tragedy. Out of that pain came the Kelsey Smith Act, a law that gives law enforcement immediate access to cell phone location data during emergencies. When someone's life is believed to be in danger, the bill passed in Kansas in 2009 and has since spread to 23 states across the U.S. When Greg testified before Congress, he held up a photo of Kelsey, the same one used in the missing posters. His voice didn't shake when he said, "They talked about privacy, but my daughter lost the most private thing anyone can lose, her life. Kelsey can't come back. But her name has become a lifeline for others, a symbol of every family who waits by the phone, praying for a signal. A call. A miracle." Missy once said quietly in an interview, "People say time heals. It doesn't. It just teaches you how to carry the pain." Kelsey Smith, a young woman who walked out of Target one summer evening and became a beacon of light for countless families still searching in the dark. If you believe justice shouldn't have to wait, share Kelsey's story. Because sometimes, a single minute can save a life. Minnesota. Winter of 2013. Snow fell quietly over the still streets of Bloomington, where a young woman full of life was unknowingly living the final day of her life. Her name was Kira Steger, 30 years old, a devoted employee at the Mall of America, the largest shopping mall in the United States. She was always on time, always smiling, and always believed she was building a beautiful future with the man she loved, Jeffrey Trevino. That night, they had dinner together, laughed, played a few games of bowling. They looked like any ordinary couple. But behind those smiles, something was terribly off. A fleeting glance, an unusual silence. And then, the night swallowed everything whole. 2 days later, Kira didn't show up for work. Her phone was off, her car gone. Her husband said, "She probably just went away for a few days." His tone was calm, too calm. And then, in the snow, police found her white car, faint red smudges smeared across the trunk like a quiet confession written in blood. This isn't just a story about murder. It's a story about love twisted into possession, about devotion turned into domination, and about a man who believed he had the right to decide whether his wife should live or die. She vanished into the night, but the blood on the mattress still told her story. On the morning of February 23, 2013, A soft layer of snow blanketed the roofs of Bloomington, Minnesota. Inside the vast Mall of America, the clock struck 9, but Kira Steger was nowhere to be seen. For someone as disciplined as Kira, this was not just strange, it was unthinkable. She had never missed a shift, never been late. Her coworkers began to worry, calling her phone again and again. No answer. When they finally reached her husband, Jeffrey Trevino, his voice was calm, almost too calm. She probably went to stay with a friend. He said, sometimes she just needs space. It was an odd statement, especially in the dead of winter, and for a woman who always told people where she was going. That evening, after hours of silence, the police were called. In every missing person case, the investigation always begins with the person closest to the victim. Jeffrey welcomed them into the house, polite and composed. He recounted the previous days in striking detail. On Thursday, February 21st, he and Kira went out for dinner, played a few rounds of bowling, and went home to watch a movie. The next morning, he said, she left around 8:30 to attend an event at work, nothing unusual, he claimed. When asked about their relationship, he smiled faintly. Just the usual couple arguments, nothing serious. For investigators, that sentence rings like an alarm. Innocent people talk about fear. The guilty talk about normality. The police began canvassing the neighborhood. A neighbor's security camera, positioned to rotate between houses, became their first real lead. The footage was grainy, shaky, but clear enough to show something unsettling. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Kira's white Chevrolet backed out of the driveway and disappeared into the darkness. Jeffrey explained it away. He said he went out to fill her gas tank, as she had asked. Indeed, the gas station camera confirmed his presence at 3:30 a.m. But one question lingered. Why would anyone drive out in the middle of a snowstorm just to fill up a car? And more importantly, why didn't he return home afterward? Meanwhile, Kira's family arrived from Illinois. Her mother, Marcy, walked through the snowy streets with flyers in her trembling hands, plastering her daughter's smiling face across every lamppost. My daughter wouldn't just disappear, she told reporters. Something happened to her. And she was right. Something had happened, something so violent. It would take months before the truth surfaced through the snow. As the days turned into weeks, investigators kept circling back to the same place, the small, quiet home on East Iowa Avenue where Kira and Jeffrey Trevino lived. Nothing about the house seemed unusual from the outside, but something about Jeffrey's story didn't sit right with the detectives. One veteran investigator murmured to his partner after rereading Jeffrey's statement, "He remembers too much and feels too little." Innocent people forget. Guilty people rehearse. When the police obtained Kira's phone records, the case took a chilling turn. In between work calls and messages from friends, there was another name, Ryan Wendt, a regional manager in the same retail chain where Kira worked. Their messages revealed a growing closeness, and one final exchange at 11:44 p.m. just hours before she vanished. The texts weren't scandalous, they were tender, uncertain, filled with hesitation. But for investigators, they painted a clear picture. Kira had been preparing to leave her marriage. Jeffrey had told police, "She doesn't have anyone else. I trust her." Yet his wife's phone told a different story, one of emotional distance, quiet longing, and a woman rediscovering her own voice after years of control. Kira wasn't betraying her husband, she was trying to survive. Sometimes, in toxic love, leaving is the only way to stay alive. Police traced Ryan's location through GPS and credit card records. He was driving toward Colorado, hundreds of miles away. At the exact time Kira disappeared, cooperative and transparent, he was soon cleared of suspicion. But then came the detail that changed everything. The timestamp of Kira's final message matched the moment she returned home from dinner. A few hours later at 2 a.m., her white Chevrolet was seen leaving the driveway. She had stopped texting. Her phone went dark, and no one saw her again. Jeffrey claimed he slept through the night, but gas station footage told another story. At 3:30 a.m., he was seen filling his car and withdrawing cash from an ATM. The camera caught his face calm, expressionless. Murderers often revisit their own lies. They rewrite the night to make it make sense, not for the police, but for themselves. Cash instead of a card. A midnight errand in the snow, every detail a thread in the fabric of deceit. By now, a profile was forming. Jeffrey was possessive, prideful, and obsessed with control. A man whose self-worth was tied to ownership. Losing Kira wasn't just heartbreak, it was humiliation. And in his mind, humiliation demanded punishment. Crimes like this never begin with blood. They begin with silence, the kind that grows between two people who once promised forever. On the morning of February 25, 2013, 3 days after Kira vanished, a call came into the Bloomington Police Department. A security officer from the Mall of America reported a white Chevrolet Malibu that had been sitting in the same parking spot for 2 days, covered in snow. "I was about to call a tow truck," the guard said, "but there's something red on the trunk." When investigators arrived, they brushed away the frozen slush and saw it faint smears of blood, barely visible beneath the frost. Behind the car, half buried in snow, lay a rolled-up trunk liner with dark stains seeping through the fabric. Laboratory tests confirmed what everyone feared. It was Kira Stegger's blood. In homicide, blood is the one witness that never lies. It remembers what others try to forget. Inside the car, officers found Kira's purse, containing printed divorce papers downloaded from the internet, unsigned. It was the missing piece of motive investigators had been waiting for. Kira hadn't disappeared. She had been silenced. That same day, police obtained a search warrant for the Trevino home. On the surface, it looked spotless. Too spotless. The bedroom smelled of detergent, the carpet looked freshly cleaned, and the bed sheets had just been changed. When forensic technicians sprayed luminol, the room came alive in a haunting blue glow. Tiny droplets, invisible to the naked eye, lit up across the floor, like constellations spreading from the bedroom. Through the hallway, and out the back door. Kira had never walked out of that house alive. Killers clean because they fear not the law, but memory. They try to wash away the past, yet every brush stroke screams of guilt. On the bedroom wall, investigators found small blood spatter, and under the mattress, hundreds of microscopic stains. Every drop belonged to Kira. Then came the link that tied everything together. In Jeffrey's car, detectives discovered a gas station receipt, time-stamped 3:30 a.m. The same time the surveillance camera had caught him fueling up and withdrawing cash from an ATM. The camera showed him wearing a gray hoodie with a white logo on the chest. A few hours later, the same hoodie appeared on a different camera this time, at the mall parking lot, worn by a man dropping off Kira's car before hailing a taxi back home. Every criminal leaves behind a trail. Some leave fingerprints. Others, a logo.
I'm going to use my right to remain silent until I can speak to my attorney.
Go ahead, have a seat then.
Attorney wants to know if I'm under arrest.
You're not free to go.
He says I'm not free to go.
That night, police moved in and arrested Jeffrey Trevino. He said nothing. He asked for a lawyer. His silence was the final confirmation of what they already knew. But even with the evidence piling up, one crucial piece was still missing: Kira herself. A murder without a body is a story without an ending. But the blood had already begun to whisper where she was waiting to be found. Weeks passed. Snow began to melt, revealing the gray streets of Minnesota, but not the truth. Despite Jeffrey Trevino's arrest, Kira's body was still missing, and without it, her family clung to a fading thread of hope. Police and volunteers organized search teams across the frozen lakes and wooded trails around Bloomington. They focused on Keller Lake, only a few miles from the Trevino home. Cadaver dogs caught faint traces of scent near the water, but nothing more. Then, one late March afternoon, as the ice began to break apart, a volunteer spotted a black plastic bag tangled in the reeds. Inside were a blood-stained pillow, a shirt, and a bra. DNA confirmed they belonged to Kira Stegger. Killers believe they can bury their sins, but the earth remembers, the water remembers, and sometimes, they give the dead back to the living. Investigators pieced together what happened. They believed Jeffrey had driven Kira's body in her car, stopped by Keller Lake to dump her belongings, then continued toward the Mississippi River, where he disposed of her remains. He thought the snow and ice would hide everything. But Minnesota's winter, no matter how cruel, always ends. On May 8, 2013, as the river thawed, a man walking his dog along the Mississippi called 911. There's something in the water. Looks like a body. When police arrived, they pulled a decomposed, unclothed body from the murky current. Dental records confirmed the worst. It was Kira Steger. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and a fractured left index finger, evidence that she had tried to defend herself. One blow to the head, a flash of rage, and then silence. He didn't just kill her, he punished her for saying no. Investigators reconstructed the crime. After discovering Kira's text messages with Ryan Wendt, Jeffrey snapped. He wrestled the phone from her hand, breaking her finger. When she resisted, he struck her in the head, killing her instantly. He wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the trunk, and drove into the night toward the river. Toward the end, months later, in October 2013, Jeffrey Trevino faced trial. His defense called it a crime of passion, not premeditated murder. But the jury saw otherwise. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 27.5 years in prison. Eligible for parole in 2031. During sentencing, Kira's sister said through tears, "He didn't just kill my sister, he destroyed every part of our family that believed in safety, in love, in trust." And her mother, Marcy, looked him in the eyes. "You threw my daughter away like trash into the river, but you will never bury her spirit." The court delivered its verdict, but for the Steger family, justice will always feel incomplete. Because no prison sentence lasts as long as grief. The courtroom that day felt colder than any Minnesota winter, not because of the temperature, but because of the silence that filled it. Jeffrey Trevino stood before the judge, his face as still as stone. No tears, no apology, only a hollow calm that chilled everyone in the room. He whispered to his attorney, almost inaudibly, "I didn't mean to. I was just angry." But anger doesn't kill people. Possession does. To Jeffrey, Kira had stopped being a wife. She had become a mirror reflecting his failure, his loss of control. And when she chose freedom, he chose annihilation. The Mississippi River drifts quietly through St. Paul, its waters gray and heavy. They say, water washes everything away. But there are sins it can't drown, they rise again every time the truth surfaces. Kira's family left the courthouse in tears. There was no victory, no sense of peace, only the dull ache of permanence. Her mother, Marcy, told reporters, "He might walk free one day, but we'll never escape this prison, the one built from memories of her voice, her laughter, her absence." Justice can punish a man, but it can't bring warmth back to an empty home. And that's the cruelest truth of all. Then, his tone softens, no longer analytical, but deeply human. If you are in a relationship that makes you afraid, walk away before the silence becomes permanent. And if you see someone trapped in that kind of fear, speak up, because silence can be its own kind of crime. Don't let Kira's story fade. Share it not for the horror, but for the warning it carries. Every story told keeps one more heartbeat alive. And maybe, just maybe, that's how justice begins.